Welcome everybody to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. This one is going to be particularly interesting for me, and because many people think that the work I do tends to get out there into certain areas and certain types of individuals read my work. But what I've discovered over the years is that my writing gets under the nose of some quite interesting individuals around the world. And for instance, I'm reminded of a gentleman who wrote to me a few years ago who was designing a line of men's underwear based upon the ideas I put forward in the payment. I've never really quite grasped how that worked, but effectively he's been very successful in terms of it. If you want to check it out, it's called Bozak Clothing. Other individuals have contacted me. I've had psychiatrists, psychologists, I've had neurologists, parapsychologists and various other individuals. But the area that I'm most delighted in people contacting me is people in the music industry. And the reason is that I'm an absolute mad music fan, you know, in terms of my music. My musical taste is extremely broad. Way back from buying my first album back in late 1969 when I bought Led Zeppelin 3, carrying forward throughout the years, and my interest in music continues to this day, where I'm particularly interested in American indie music, alt country and various other areas. And those of you who follow me on my Facebook page will know that my tastes are somewhat wide for a person of 62 years of age, but that's one of those things that makes me rather weird. I was therefore absolutely delighted when around about 18 months ago I received a message on Facebook by a gentleman called Charlie Farren. Now, I had been aware of Charlie's work through many sources. For instance, one of the areas of Charlie's work I was particularly interested in was his involvement with the supporting of the band Boston. But his musical career, his musical pedigree is absolutely phenomenal. I don't think there's anybody in the music business Charlie doesn't know or hasn't played with or worked with at some time in the past. So what we're planning to do with this particular show is we're going to get to know Charlie a little bit more, a little bit about his background and how he got into music and everything else. And then we'll move on to why he's on this show and particularly what it is about his interests that generates him wanting to write music that is actually the music of the kind of stuff that we're very interested in here. So without further ado, Charlie, how's things over there in Massachusetts?
Things are fantastic. It's a little bit rainy today, but we need the rain for my tomatoes. And
your tomatoes, that's hardly a rock star thing, is it? You know, you're concerned about your tomatoes.
And I'm excited. I'm working on my what will be my 11th studio album of original material, and it will be my 17th overall release. And a little bit stumbled because I broke my finger. I broke this finger in my left hand, and so I can't play. It's been in a splint for 2.5 months, and by the end of this month, I'll be back on stage performing. So it put a little kink in my recording project, but I'm really excited about the way it's coming out.
Well, probably it could end up with some kind of very interesting guitar style if you've actually got one finger that doesn't function in the correct way. So you could try slide guitar or something.
A couple of years ago, I actually cut the tip of my right finger, middle finger, off. I won't show you that one, but it's fine. But that I didn't even miss a gig because your right hand, I could adjust, but with the left hand, it's a very important hand. It's an important finger in your left hand. So I've been kind of healing and working on the vocals on this new record, which I'm going to be calling Guitar and Voice. And it's one single. It's the first time I've done a record like this. It's a single guitar and a single voice. There's no harmonies. There's no percussion. And the trick is to get it to swing the right way and to get the lyrics right, to get the melody right. And it's coming out fantastic. And it will shine a spotlight on my self-taught, unique guitar style.
Wow. Now on that, so how did you get into the music business? I mean, it's one of the things we all dream of as kids as doing it, but you've actually done it and lived the dream. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how, where you're from and everything else and how your musical career has developed, because I'm fascinated to know, so please fire away.
I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts, and you and I were talking earlier about how the cities in New England are like the cities named after the cities in England. And there's a lot of, I live in Chelmsford now, and there's a Chelmsford, England. I grew up in Malden. I had three sisters, and we were kind of a musical family. We all sang, and we sang out. Irish family, we would sing out. We didn't sing with little voices. We sang big voices. And I always thought that's the way you sang. And when I went to school, I remember the teacher said, okay, everyone stand up and let's sing. And everybody stood up with their little first grade voices and sang. And I sang with the big Farren family voice, Everybody turned and looked at me. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe this is what I'll do, My older sister had a band. They used to practice at my house. There were four girls, guitar, 6-string guitar, 12-string guitar, banjo, and one girl played tambourine. With two Irish girls and two Jewish girls, and it was kind of like Wild Colonial Boy meets Hava Nagila, and we walked around at homes, a lot of Jewish people in Malden, and they performed in churches, and they performed in synagogues, and they performed. I just thought that was the neatest thing in the world. You could actually have your own band. So of course I started playing guitar, and started in probably about the 8th or 9th grade, started trying to form bands. And it wasn't until I was in high school when I had a band that we performed at a show called Junior Varieties. And Malden High School has the junior class sponsors a variety show. And my band, it was a 3-piece band called Blue Willow, and we played a song that I had written, and we won. And I can remember thinking to myself, all right, this is what I'm going to do, right? I had the bug by then. Of course, I went to college, which is now called Salem State University, and at least in the States, I was majoring in English literature, and at least in the States, you're required to take these courses that have nothing to do with what your major is. And I remember one day, I was walking across the quad on my way to a weather and climate class, not wanting to go. And there was a band in the lobby of the Student Union building. And I can remember thinking to myself, and I remember going in and seeing them and thinking to myself, what am I doing? This is what I should be doing. I'm going to go to weather and climate. What? I don't need to be taught about that. I mean, I want to go. I should be doing this. I'd be better than these guys. So I made up my mind. That summer, I joined the band, and we were playing covers, and we played all summer at one place. And they wanted to, at the end of the summer, they wanted to extend us through November, and I went with it. I didn't go back to school. And I think it was a good move.
Just very quickly, what kind of covers were you doing, though? What year was this, and what kind of music were you doing at that stage in terms of the covers?
So I graduated high school in 1971, and so this would have been 72, probably 73 to 77 when I was doing covers. I joined someone else's band as the lead singer. There were two guitar players, a bass player, and a drummer, and they were older guys, and they hired me to just be a singer. I didn't play guitar, and we didn't play the kind of covers that would get us paid a lot, like the pop hits. We were playing the Deep Stones cuts and the Fleetwood Mac songs, and Yardbird songs, and the kind of songs where you would not the hits, right? We were playing the songs, the guitar player songs. But we had an agent, and we worked from, obviously Boston to Philadelphia to Syracuse up to Bangor, Maine, that triangle. And we worked 45 weeks a year, and we played 5 to 7 sets a night, 5 to 7 nights a week. Just crazy. And that's where you really learned how to be, I think. That band was called Live Lobster. I'm still in touch with those guys. But I wanted to write. I played guitar, and I wanted to play guitar, and I wanted to write my own songs. And so me and the guitar player in that band started another band where we played only songs that we wrote, and we went from working 45 weeks a year to working no weeks a year because we had to get it going, and that was hard. That band was called Balloon, and we got that band on the map on the strength of a couple of singles that I wrote that got played around New England. And one song was called East Coast, West Coast, and another was called Listen to the Rock. Charles Lockwood.
So what, very quickly, Charlie, on this, so right early on you were writing your own material. So in terms of that, how did you build the songs? I mean, I'm always intrigued by this as to where a song comes from, how you have your ideas, your inspiration. So let's go, I'd say the first couple of songs you wrote, what inspired you and how did they come about and how did you build the song up?
Well, but, interestingly, I've always written on a nylon string guitar, classical guitar. And then I would bring the song to the band, and then the band would turn it into a rock song. And I started off, I think, just emulating artists that I liked. And I learned early on that the best way to write and the best way to play is instead of emulating people that you admire, you write to the things that come easy to you. You write to the guitar parts that you play well, and you write songs that you sing well, songs that work well for your voice. I know tons of people that try to write, and they're always trying to do things that they're not that good at. And I think, for me, what always worked was the stuff that I felt like I was good at. I always invented my own chords, and I always sang songs that were in the range that was comfortable for my voice. I still do that to this day. I'm a better writer now than I was then, but I remember the first song that I wrote that was good. I knew it was good right away, and I still perform it in my set. Live shows, there's a song called Afraid to Fly Away. I recorded it on my Deja Blue CD, and I did it true to the way I wrote it, just with guitar and a voice, and it's beautiful. But the funny thing is when I play it, I explain to the audience that I wrote it this way, but I brought it to the band and we turned it into a, we turned it into a rock tune. It still is our best tune, but a good song works in any format. So I've learned over the years to write to what comes. You shouldn't try to write. You have to be clear. You have to just be empty and let it come, and write stuff that feels easy and natural for you. So that's what I still do, and I did that then, and my best stuff has always come out that way.
So you had the band Balloon, and effectively you had a few hit singles. So what then happened from there? How did that then develop?
Well, WBCN was the big rock station in Boston, really in New England. And the guy on that station who was the king was the morning guy, Charles Lockwood. He still has an internet radio show. He lives in Hawaii now. And anything that Charles played, everybody at WBCN played. And anything that WBCN played, everybody played. And that's the way it worked then, back in the 70s. And Charles, I did a song on a 4-track tape called Listen to the Rock, and it was quirky, and it didn't sound like anything else on the radio, mostly because I did it in my bedroom on a 4-track machine. But Charles loved it, and he played it in heavy rotation. And suddenly, my band, who couldn't get any work, was getting a lot of work, and we were filling nightclubs all over New England. And we released the second single called East Coast, West Coast. And it was a very exciting time. I was working in a music store. And I got word that Joe Perry was looking for a lead singer who played guitar. And I went to the audition. Don Law, who's a
Could you just explain to the audience who Joe Perry is? There'll be people out there who many will have know of him, but others won't. So you can just explain who Joe Perry is to them.
So Joe is from the Boston area, and he is in a band called Aerosmith, who I think everybody knows, arguably the biggest rock band in America. And he's currently touring with a band called the Hollywood Vampires with Alice Cooper and with Johnny Depp and various other sidemen who worked with Guns N' Roses and various big rock bands. So Joe is the lead guitar player and co-writer in Aerosmith. He's the arguably the coolest rock guitar player out there in terms of his whole package. His carriage and his sound. He's a fantastic writer of guitar riffs. All those cool riffs that Aerosmith plays, he contributes that element to that band. So real famous guy, real great break for me. And I auditioned to get that gig. And our first show was, our first big show was at the Springfield Civic Center opening for Ozzy Osbourne. And the opening act for us was Def Leppard. So I went from rehearsing in someone's basement to rehearsing, at the Orpheum and theater in Boston. And we got on that tour. I can't remember how many dates it was. It was maybe a dozen dates with that lineup. And that would have been 1980. We ended up touring a lot. We toured with Alice Cooper, ZZ Top, the Kinks, the Scorpions, Judas Priest, Kansas. I can't think more. ZZ Top. I might have said that. We just toured constantly, probably for a year and a half. That was a really fun time, and David Hull was the bass player in that band, and he was also the bass player in Farren, my next band, and I'm still friendly with him. I see him all the time, and I hear from Joe from time to time, and the guys in the crew, and that was a fun time for me.
I mean, I can but imagine, I was always somebody that couldn't play musical instruments, but I was always somebody that was very, very jealous of friends of mine that could. And also the sheer glamour of particularly rock music in the late 70s, early 80s, and how wonderful it must have been. I mean, just the bands you just mentioned there are just so evocative. And funnily enough, my wife is a huge fan of Def Leppard, and I never really appreciated Def Leppard greatly because I tended to see them as being the kind of second wave of English heavy rock. There was the Led Zeppelins, the Black Sabbaths, the Deep Purples, and then it seemed to go quiet. And then bands like Saxon and various other people came up. And Def Leppard was one of those. And it was only when we were up in Liverpool and Def Leppard were playing at the arena in Liverpool, which is my home city. And they were playing with I can't remember who the support bands were. But they blew me away. I was so impressed with the sound package itself and the overall production, because years ago when I used to go to concerts, they were kind of sweaty university halls kind of thing, or it would be sort of places where, bands like Free and Bronco and 10 Years After, people like that were playing, which is a very different sound, whereas the level of production, and I think it was Lang was the producer, I guess, of them. So he really knew how to put together a sound that was interesting. You were always worried, you're always interested as to where the music was going to go, which I think, when I used to listen on headphones all the time, it was the thing that I really used to love. And for a period of time, I was interested in progressive music bands like Yes and everybody else. But my real love is much more harder driving rock, and I think it always has been. So, ZZ Top, I just love ZZ Top. Just the whole sound of ZZ Top. It's like a kind of just driving music. You know, it's really, really superb. And Boston has very much been the home of I know that's easy talking, I'm from Boston, I know from Texas, but Boston has always had its own unique sound, you know, from bands like Steely Dan. You know, lots of bands really started up there. And I know that you're on the periphery of probably one of my favourite bands of all time, which was Boston. And when the first Boston album came out, I remember, was it Tom Schultz or whatever the guy's name is, that he wanted to bring out the definitive rock album of all time, that everybody would think this defined everything. And in many ways, that first Boston album did. You know, it was just superbly well done in so many ways. So if you can tell us now about as you moved on, how things developed in terms of your career, because you've done this mega tour with these incredibly named bands. How did it then develop from there?
You mentioned Def Leppard. David and I just went last week. A friend of mine plays lead guitar in REO Speedwagon, and they were playing at the Infinity.
REO Speedwagon is still, hold on, REO Speedwagon is still going, are they?
And they sound fantastic, and they play nothing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they were on the bill with Def Leppard, and we went and saw them and visited with those guys last week. But at a certain point, Joe changed management, and the new management clearly was just focused on getting Aerosmith back together. They wanted to add more Aerosmith tunes and move in the direction of getting Aerosmith back together. And David and I, you know, we thought that didn't seem that appealing to us to kind of hang around until Aerosmith got back together. We were really focused on writing the second record and making it, you know. And so when it became clear that Joe was going to get back with Aerosmith, David and I started writing together, and we put together several different lineups that led towards Fahrenheit. In the meantime, I had signed a record deal with Atlantic Records with Ahmet Ertegun, who was the founder of the label. He signed Ray Charles and the Rolling Stones and Aretha Franklin and Led Zeppelin. He had Paul Rodgers on the label. He had Yes on his label. And he signed me to because he liked my songwriting, and but felt that radio wasn't ready for that style at the time. And so I was writing and working with him. He was kind of mentoring me as a songwriter, and I was also writing with David Hall, and that started to feel like a band, a three-piece band, and Atlantic and Warner's the kind of sister companies at the time they were. And I was on tour with a band that was called the New England All-Star Jam Band. And it was, you mentioned Steely Dan. Skunk Baxter was in it. Roger Earl from Foghat was in it. James Montgomery.
Just jumping in there, certain names there. Skunk Baxter, what a guitarist. I mean, the guitar solo in My Old School, I think, has to be the most perfect guitar solo anywhere. And of course, Foghat, you know, which were really good old-time rock. The Foghat were British, weren't they, as I remember? Yeah. I think.
And they're great guys. We toured with Foghat when I was with Joe Perry, so I knew those guys, and had become friendly with Roger Earl, who was the drummer, who's just like a fantastic guy. He's still playing and touring with Foghat. He was the drummer, and it was the Rolling Stones horn section was in the band, the Uptown Horns. You know, friends of mine, John Butcher, some guys from Boston, Barry Goodrow from Boston was in it, Fred Sheehan from Boston was in it. And we would tour around and just play songs that we all knew. And it was fun to do, and it was a payday, and it was something that we did while I was putting my next band, Fahrenheit, together. And one night, Foghat's manager came to one of the shows, and Fahrenheit was on the bill with this all-star jam band. So I would perform with Fahrenheit, and then they went up and performed with the jam band. And his manager saw us and called me the next day and said, "I want to sign you to Warner Brothers." And I thought, well, at least let's meet, you know. And because I knew that wasn't how it worked. You know, somebody doesn't just see your band and say, "I want to sign you." That's not the way it really works. So I met with him, and I said that to him, and he said, "No, I have connections. I can." Da, da, da. And he came to another gig with a cassette player, and recorded the band on a cassette player. You know, held it up in the air, and we got a call from Warner Brothers about a week and a half later. And he said, "Listen, I just heard a cassette. I love the band. I love this guy, Tony Altito is his name. We want to sign you to a record deal." And I said to him, "Look, this isn't the way it works. Look, I'm going to call Warner Brothers front desk, and if they connect me back to you, then we can talk." So I did, and he picked up the phone. He said, "Now do you believe me?" So anyway, that was a crazy story, and that's how we got a wonderful record deal with Warner Brothers. And I think I might have lost you.
Have you?
Oh, there you are. Okay. You disappeared for a minute.
Okay.
So Russ Styrett at Warner Brothers signed us. We got the biggest producer of the 80s to produce us, Keith Olsen, who I'm still in touch with. And Keith had produced, any hit record in the 80s, he probably produced them. So we went out to L.A. and we did that tour. We recorded that record. I was already friendly with Brad Delp of Boston, and my drummer was close friends with him. He actually came out to L.A. and sang some tracks on the record that we ended up not using. And so when the record came out, we had immediately had some great response. "Fool in Love" was the first single, the first MTV hit. And Brad brought the record to Tom Scholz of Boston, and they asked us to open for their tour. And they were the biggest act of the summer that year. This was 1987. And we played 90-something nights, and every single night was sold out.
So that must have been the third stage album.
That was the third stage tour. Amanda was the big lead hit.
Yeah, that's a fantastic song.
Yeah. And they were, Boston, I knew those guys just because everybody in the Boston area knows each other. All the Boston bands know each other. But I never really saw them perform. And they really weren't a Boston band. They didn't play around the clubs and they weren't part of the Boston scene. They just bang emerged, with a record. And nobody really knew them that well. We knew who they were. So when we went out on the road with them, I didn't know what they would be like live. And they were just so, I don't know if you've ever seen them live.
No.
But that band was so strong live. And talk about every song being a hit. Subsequently, I've recorded a lot of things with Brad. I recorded some things. I've signed on a couple of Boston albums. I've been doing some background vocals, and Brad and I have done background vocals together on several different recordings. Most notably, Ben Orr, who was the bass player in the Cars. We sang on one of his records. I also sang on you mentioned Free, which is one of my favorite early bands, and I got to sing on a Bad Company song on their Fame and Fortune. It was a song called Fame and Fortune on their Fame and Fortune record.
Wow.
So we did the Boston tour. Most nights were most of the big cities were 3 to 6 nights. The show that we did in New England was 9 nights. It's at Worcester Center, and every night was sold out. Maybe 4 nights in New York at Meadow, what is it called? Meadowlands. Cities like Chicago would be 4 nights, and 3 nights in Atlanta, and 6 nights in L.A. That type of thing. So it was almost like we had little residencies in all these big stadiums. Really fun. The second leg of the tour was one-nighters, and what a blast,
You mentioned that you sang background vocals on one of the Boston albums. Did you sing on? Was it the one that came after Third Stage? There was another album that came out. They brought out about the late '80s, I think it was, which I thought was absolutely astounding as an album.
Yeah, they had several, and I'm like most musicians like me. You're a creator of music. You're not a consumer of music. So I knew of the Third Stage record because we heard it every night. When you're not touring with the band, you don't stay as familiar with what they're doing because you're so busy on what you're doing. But Tom released 2 or 3 more CDs after Third Stage, and I sang backup on 2 songs that spanned 2 different records, and I wouldn't even be able to tell you the name of it. I think wouldn't be able to remember the names of them, but I sang backup on 2 of them, and because Tom works in a very slow scale, so I might sing a song 1 year, and it might not come out for 4 or 5 more years, and he might put it on one record and then put something else on another record later. So I do have copies of those records, and they're really great. He has a certain sound that he's a really meticulous guy in the studio for sure. So somewhere around the end of that tour, we had trouble with our name. There was another band called Farren that had a stronger claim to the name. Also, the sound of music changed. It shifted. And this Seattle kind of grungy sound, that all of a sudden we didn't sound like the hot new thing anymore. We had a problem with our name, and my wife got pregnant. We had been trying, and that happened. And so a lot of things kind of happened. This was like 1989, and my first child was born. The 80s sound was gone. The new sound was in. Nirvana and Soundgarden. That was the new sound. And we didn't sound like that. We sounded like the 80s. So it was just time, and we decided to pull back, and I started to just perform as a solo. And I went to work. I went to work at Digital Equipment Corporation. I had a little humble job at Digital, and my wife decided she wasn't going to go back to work. So a new chapter opened in our lives, and I kind of wormed my way around inside of Digital to the point where I had a pretty good job. And then Compaq bought us. And suddenly I was working with partners. I was working with systems management partners, working on the side, making my records. And suddenly the partners I was working with were important to Compaq, who were a Windows company. And then after a few years there, Hewlett-Packard bought us. And by the time Hewlett-Packard was there, I had a big global business development type job, working with Linux partners, working with the leading Linux partner. And we were there to see if we could incubate a business around Linux. And that was a really exciting global job, really corporate. And I was into being successful there and doing a good job raising my kids. I still recorded records in my own studio and still released them and did maybe a handful of shows a year. But my focus was travel. I traveled all over the world running a business for HP, developing a business. So after, long story short, after 24 years in corporate America, about 5 years ago, I retired. And I was able to retire, and I started focusing on my solo career again. Recorded a record with a friend, John Butcher. We called the project FBI, Farren, Butcher, Incorporated. And we toured around as a duo for a while. But I realized that I really wanted to work solo and develop my guitar style. I call it full band guitar style. And I wanted to finally make a record that was the way I wrote the songs. Instead of writing the songs and bringing them to your partners and reinterpreting it for drums and bass and piano, I wanted to make the record the way I wrote the songs. And that's what this record is. I call it full band style, It's a nylon string guitar, one vocal, no harmonies. But the idea is it's not a folk record, it's a rock record, and the idea is I want to make you forget that there's not a full production on the record. And I think I'm accomplishing that, and I'm excited about that. That's the way I perform now. I perform as a solo. Yep.
I was going to say, it's one of the things that, I started listening to a lot of your music, and I listen to a lot of it now, because there is something powerfully intense and very, very closely personal. When you listen to your music, even the live songs, they very much come across that you feel that you're contacting directly the person you're singing to. And I find that almost a unique skill. Your song Deja Blue, I know you perform it a lot, but it's an absolutely powerfully wonderful song. And what I like about it is it's one of your work, it grows on you because you appreciate the musicianship and the singing. And at different times you see different things in the songs, which is incredibly powerful. I just thought I'd say that I'm a huge fan of your work, and I think quite incredible. Now, in terms of the new album itself, I don't know, what would you prefer to go into discussing the new album, or would you prefer to discuss the influences that you've had over the years? Because I know there's a whole list of individuals that in recent years that you're finding you're writing your songs about. Which way would you like to approach it?
Well, I influences. There is a very short list of artists that if they release a record, I'll get it. I'll listen to it, and in some cases I'll study it. Sting is one of those people. Joni Mitchell is one of those people. Not a lot more. Maybe definitely Steely Dan. Anything that they do, I'm going to listen to. I think that those artists are super compelling. Other ones too. I really love Taylor Swift. I think she's fantastic.
I totally agree. I think she's absolutely incredible. As a songwriter, just incredible. I'm interested in your Joni Mitchell thing, though, because I picked this up once or twice when I was listening to your music. I particularly like the Joni Mitchell song Amelia, and the way in which she plays the guitar in that. And there's similarities with your guitar style. It's kind of jazzy and everything. I know she worked with Jaco Pastorius and people like that, so she had the top jazz musicians that she worked with. But your style is very, very similar. And that's fascinating to say that.
I think she's an alien, there's a video online of her as a young woman, and she has such a honest look, and she's just sitting in front of a roomful of people, and she's strumming a dulcimer, which has only got 3 strings on it. And she's playing this song, I think it was Chelsea Morning, and it's not like anything else in terms of style. It's just her own style. It makes sense completely from a structural perspective as a song, but it doesn't have the same structure that most songs have. And that's just such a beautiful thing. I'm just thinking, where did she get that from? I think the same thing of Sting. He's just anything he does is going to be interesting in my view. But again, as a creator of music, I'm not a consumer, and so I wouldn't say I'm a fan as much as I would say I'm interested in what they're doing, and I'd like to try and there's more. There are more people too, but I think the biggest thing that happened for me was when I retired. I wanted to get that, prosperous corporate look off of my frame, so I could be a musician again. A lot of airport photos and morning meetings, you tend to morph towards the way businessmen look. So anyway, I found a route around my neighborhood. It's a 5-mile route that I walk every day, and I started to listen to lectures, just whatever was comedy routines, stand-up, anything, science lectures, philosophy lectures. The first thing that really killed me was I saw a silly little cartoon. it was a cartoon voice. I didn't watch it because I just would listen as I walked, and it was an explanation of the double slit experiment. And I thought to myself, I'm 50-something, what, at the time, and I never heard of this. How could that be? So I started to listen to related type of lectures. And I thought to myself, the implications of this would blow my mind. And I started listening to, I listened to Robert Lanza. We had talked about, he wrote the biocentrism book. The double slit experiment, if this is true, then what else could be true, And my worldview started to shift really dramatically. And it's almost like for the first time in my life, when I was younger, I was trying to be a rock star. When I was, a little bit older, you're trying to raise your family. You're trying to be successful in your corporate role. It's almost like you don't have time for yourself until you passed all of that. And now I was able to focus on just learning, not weather and climate, but learning stuff that I thought was interesting. And I started listening to things that you were doing on YouTube, different authors. Peter Russell was somebody that just, uttered 2 or 3 sentences that made me say, wait a minute, what? Terence McKenna, Alan Watts, and they all were coming at it from different perspectives. Alan Watts was an academic. Terence McKenna was a hallucinogenian, right? He was a mushrooms guy. Robert Lanza is a stem cell research guy. He's like a world famous stem cell research guy. Peter Russell is a physicist. And I just started incorporating their viewpoints in my songs. Not talking about those things, but letting those things inform the subject. An example of that is Terence McKenna was somebody who would say that language plays an important part in our reality, in our awareness. We give names to nouns, and once there's a name for something, we can start talking about it. We can start understanding it. If a lot of industries have arcane names to different shapes or to different types of tools, and you're not even aware. It's not even part of your existence. But once you learn about it, now suddenly it is. So I have a song that's on this new record, and it derives from that kind of discussion, or those discussions about language and how language creates reality. It's a song called New Word. I Need a New Word, that says how I feel about you, right? It's a love song. But the idea is that I can't talk to you about how I feel about you because I don't have words. And I need to invent a word because love and beauty don't do it. They don't say the word. And so that kind of whole discussion thread helped me come up with the lyrics to this new song, and I think it's a fantastic song. It's a simple song, and it's not about esoterica. It's about love, but it's informed by that. And so I believe that on this record, all of my songs were deliberately structured that way. When I look back on songs I've written in the past, I realize that's true as well. You talk about deja vu a lot and out-of-body experiences, and I've had those. I've had a near-death experience, and deja blue.
Do you want to tell us about that? Do you want to tell us about either the NDE or the OBE that you've experienced?
I will, because I think they're great stories. But deja blue, the color of love, is informed by things like what you're talking about, deja vu and out of body. But it isn't about that. It's just informed by that. It's really about empathy for a friend whose heart is broken. And I'm saying, now I feel it too because I've been there, right? When I was a younger guy, before I was doing original music, I was away somewhere performing, and we went to the local lake to swim, and someone in the band had the idea, hey, let's swim from one, the floating platforms in the lake to another one, and I started swimming, and I got stitches in my side. I couldn't breathe, and I started to go down, and I remember fighting, and I remember saying, I'm not going to make it. And I remember just floating down and seeing it getting darker and darker, and you have that okay, let's see what happens now feeling. Like you actually stop fighting, and you give up, and you disappear. And during that disappearance, it was weird, it's all the things that people say. You have this sense. I had a sense of timelessness. It was almost as though, and we can talk about time too. I had a sense that there wasn't any time, and that everything was now, and that nothing was over. Right? I didn't have a sense of, oh my God, it's over. I had a sense of what happens now, and suddenly everything was happening now. Everything that ever happened was right there, and it wasn't flashing. I didn't have a sense of it flashing. It was just all there, and it was strange. And the next thing you know, I felt my feet scraping on the ground, and somebody had come and fished me out in a boat, in a canoe, and I had me hanging off the side of the canoe. And I remember coming to, and a circle of faces around me, and feeling really weird the whole day. I played that night. Didn't go to the hospital. I played that night, but that was a game changer for me. And since then I've at least 3 or 4 times a year I have that sense of almost like I'm watching myself. All of a sudden, I have that deja vu thing. And sometimes I actually try to have that. I try to encourage that because I want to know more about that. I want to know where it's coming from. I don't have a good sense of that, but one of the things that Peter Russell said that made me stop, it really rang a bell with me, was he was talking about time and space. And he said, if we're going to talk about space, if we're going to talk about the speed of light, for instance, he said we have to think of it from the perspective of light. And from the perspective of light, as you approach the speed of light, you get increasingly slower, and at the speed of light, time stops. And if time stops, then there's no space, right? So light is everywhere. Light's not traveling. In reality, light is, right? And we experience just a little sliver of that as what we create as light. But the light that we see is light that we create internally. That's not light that's out there. So he ends that sentence with, all that we experience, there's no spaces, and there's no places, and there's no time. There's only our experience. And our experience is internal. And it's self-created. We create it. And when it's over, it's not over. We're like the energy that powers whirlpools. Water passes through us, air passes through us, substances pass through us. The energy that is us has nothing to do with the stuff around us. Even when I was a little kid, I always thought that things are what's the word I want? Entropic. They immediately begin to disintegrate. Everything does, except invisible things like thoughts and feelings. Those things stay with you. Those are the things that you create. And even as a little kid, I had a sense of that. People would say, "Oh, you have 5 senses," and I'd say, "But what about feelings? My feelings, that's a sense." They don't count that. We don't count that in our culture. But to me, that's the thing. And so I try to incorporate that kind of thinking in in my writing. I have a song called "The Powers That Be," and that song is just like, we're the ones with the power. We've got the muscle. We're the authority. Every thought and idea is a miracle. And that's what we're creating in this experience. We're creating the expansion of that which is everything by coming up with new ideas and thoughts and feelings. Those are all completely unique to all of us, and that's the thing. The metaphor for that is this visible light expansion that our senses detect, our telescopes detect. The universe is flying apart, right? It's expanding, but it's not expanding because we see dots of light that change color, because that light is internal. It's changing because we are creating new thoughts, and we're the powers that be. And that song, it's a very simple song, but it's informed by all of this stuff that I've been able to absorb as a guy with his own time on his hands, So I'm excited about this record. I'm excited to be in your show and to connect with your fantastic audience. Are you kidding me?
Well, it's one of the, there's so many things that you discuss there that have fascinated me for many, many years. The idea of perception, the idea of the way language, as you rightly say, structures the way we perceive the world. You may be aware or not that there is the concept called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which was postulated in the mid-60s, I think, whereby there's an argument to say that whatever we perceive, the way our linguistic structures work is how we perceive them. So therefore we perceive through language, and it's language that hones the way we see things. Then we have the individuals like yourself, and there are many individuals I've spoken to, including a couple of previous guests on this show. I mean, we had Gary Lackman on the show a few months ago, who's Gary Valentine, who was the lead guitarist of Blondie, and he was explaining to us that the song he wrote called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear" was actually to do with, he had a telepathic girlfriend who was aware of what he was doing when Blondie were on tour, and she would phone him up the next day after he'd been up to things, and she'd say, "I saw you with that girl last night," and that's what that song is about. So singer-songwriters like yourself actually hone an idea and change it in some way to make it more acceptable, but there's this subtle personal experiences. Then we had Pierre Rubessa, who was he was in one of the first bands to be signed by Virgin America. He's a Canadian guy, and he had a near-death experience on stage where he was electrocuted like a fool. He actually touched a keyboard that was live and had a whole near-death experience. And to me, it is always fascinating that people like yourselves, once you've had one of these experiences, the whole world changes, and the materialist reductionists can bang on till the cows come home that this is all there is. And they know this is all there is because this is what science tells them all there is. But it's self-evident from experiences that this isn't all there is. Consciousness is prime. And again, I think your points about the idea of inner light is intriguing. I don't know if you've read my book, The Infinite Mind Field, but I have whole sections there on biophotons and the way in which biophotons are generated. And again, if you're interested or anybody else is interested, I strongly suggest that you check out the papers by a Hungarian researcher called Professor István Bokken, who is doing some incredible research in terms of the generation of biophotons within the brain. So clearly here we're starting to move out of this kind of stricture that we have of materialist reductionism. In other words, the logic of materialist reductionism is if something cannot be explained by material reductionism, it doesn't exist, therefore we ignore it. But of course within quantum physics, as you said in the double split experiment and the superposition and various other ideas, clearly there's something deeper here that sometimes we don't have, as you rightly say, the words for. We don't have the words to describe these sensations, but they're just as real. And I think it's so important that there's singer-songwriters like yourself out there that are really getting these ideas out to the general public so they subliminally pick up the subtlety of what is going on here. So
No,
Please go on.
I've reached the point where I don't have any doubt about this. I feel as though I've come to the conclusion. I'm not searching for. I'm not wondering about this. I think this is definitely the way it is. And I do think that this is not taught in schools. I think though that this is changing. I can sense that it's changing, and I think that it's going to be obviously true to the next generations. And they're going to be thinking this new way, and they're going to say, how could people think this old way? That this is all there is. It's clearly not. So yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to change. I'm just trying to write material that is simple and rings true, and is true to me. So that's why I'm not talking directly about this. But I think that this worldview, is true and will be picked up by people. People will notice this as they start to become, enlightened. I don't think there's anything spiritual about this. I think that this is scientific. I envision this experience as a big lab box. When you see the box and you have the gloves, you put the gloves on and you experiment. Well, that's us. We're all the fingers. We're one guy, and we're all the fingers, and we're not supposed to be fighting. We're supposed to be having experiences, and that's how I liken it. And I think that that's clearly true. I don't think it's spiritual. I'm not a religionist. I think that this is sensible. This makes sense. And they have the big question is the Big Bang. The Big Bang is when we're conceived.
Spot on. I think one of the major problems here is that I think your point about future generations will look back on this generation of science, and they will look back as a similar way to the way in which 19th century scientists look back at the Aristotelian science and that paradigm, and they would say, how could they not see? How could they not understand that consciousness was prime? How could they not see that the mysteries of consciousness, how the brain functions, the binding problem within the brain, the idea of the black holes, the way in which this is probably some form of internally generated hologram that we're existing within. And again, this is not spirituality. I think you've hit the nail on the head. You and I are not religious. I'm not religious, and I never have been religious. I find religion nonsensical. Being spiritual is also the wrong term. It's being deep thinking. It's actually questioning behind the questions. I find, for instance, what frustrates the hell out of me, in my new book, Opening the Doors of Perception, I discuss hallucinations. And you'll find that people will explain certain experiences, like an out-of-the-body experience or a near-death experience, as an hallucination. But then you would then ask the question, okay, Mr. Scientist, okay, Mr. Neurologist, explain exactly what an hallucination is. How is it, for instance, that when somebody has an hallucination, there are two hallucinations going on? And I use the argument in the new book, and I say, there's an individual who describes to Oliver Sacks, I think it was Oliver Sacks or Ramachandran, I can't remember which two it was, and he has a hallucination of a monkey sitting on the lap of the psychologist. Now, there are two hallucinations going on here. There's the hallucination of the monkey on the guy's lap, but there's also the hallucination of exclusion, because effectively the monkey is occluding the guy's lap and where the monkey is. It's occluding what is behind the monkey, if this makes sense. So there are two things here taking place. And they say, oh, it's an hallucination. We've given it a nice label. So we're coming back to language again, aren't we? The idea of the language, we give it a label, preferably with a nice Latin term or a Greek term, and therefore it proves that we know what we're talking about. But of course we don't. Because we don't, do we? And it's Schadenfreude. It's not Schadenfreude at all. It's hubris. It's the idea that we have explained everything, and it's all nice and neat. And that's why people like Lanza, he's a very brave individual, Lanza, because he's putting his reputation on the line by making these statements. And like Ibn Alexander with his near-death experience, Alexander didn't need to come up and tell people exactly what happened in his near-death experience, but he does. And what happens is they become criticized. you know, you're not allowed to do this. Whereas people like you and I, we have the freedom to really ask the really big questions. And I think you are one of the ideal guys that is asking these questions in an incredibly subtle way. I'm just now interested in some of the tracks on the album. You know, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, I think. So is there any kind of tracks that you'd like to discuss and let people know about, to watch out for on the new album, that you think that I can give you the background to this song, which will make it more interesting for you?
Well, the one of the songs is "Don't Believe Your Eyes." Right? It's called "Don't Believe Your Eyes." When they tell you everything's all right, when you can smell the smoke and feel the fire, it's not about what you see. You know, I think that people tend to, show me, right? It's not about that. It's about what you feel, and that's what that song is basically about. I have another one that has been going over great live, called "True Story," and it's, my sister said to me one time, "You should make a gospel record." And I thought for a second, and I said, That's what I'm doing. I'm writing my gospel. My records are my gospel, and that's what we're all doing, by the way. So pay attention to that. Do it with intent, because we're all writing our story, our gospel. So True Story is me. It's everything I see and everything I am and everyone I know and every song I hear. I'm writing. That's the story I'm writing, and that's what the song is about. It's kind of very meta, and it goes over great because people listen to it and they laugh and they think, wow, I guess I'm doing that too. That's what we're all doing. And I have another one called "Wound Up World," which is kind of a rocker, and it is a wound up world, and it's wound up for all the wrong reasons. Nothing can go wrong. And this song is just about, hey, be kind to your mind, and sit back and relax. And that goes back to what we said at the beginning of this conversation. When I write songs, I have a guitar in every room, and I walk around the house, and I don't try at all. I write what comes easily to me. When I record, I definitely practice to be precise. But when I'm writing, I don't practice guitar. I write the songs. That's how I practice guitar, by playing the songs. And my big mantra is not to try. It's to just let it happen, and don't finish the song until it's ready to be finished. And just be open-minded and just work at it all the time. And all of a sudden, you mentioned Deja Blue earlier. I had the chords and the melody to that song, and I didn't have the Deja Blue concept. And I was calling it, I had a working title, something else, something empty that rhymed. I had lyrics that were empty that rhymed. And I kept thinking, no, you can't do that. You have to wait. And one day, I had one of those experiences where you felt like, wait a minute, I've done this before. And I just thought about the idea of seeing somebody who's heartbroken, and that empathy coming from them makes me feel like, okay, I know exactly how you feel. Like, I call that Deja Blue. And that's the color and nature of love, So all of a sudden I went, oh, I'm so glad I waited until lightning struck, because I think I have something that's, I think that's a song. It's an example of a song that I have that I think is as good as any song. Mm-hmm. Another one like that is "Old and Young" from my "Old and Young" CD, and I wrote that when I left Hewlett Packard. One of my friends said, "So what's next for you, Charlie?" I tell this at my shows. I said, "Well, I think I'm going to sing my songs and play my little nylon guitar." He said, "Well, gee, you're kind of old for that, aren't you?" And then I said, "Well, maybe I am, but that's what I'm going to do." And so I wrote the song "Old and Young," and the whole thing is just, I finally arrived. This is the time in my life where I'm going to have, I'm going to have those moments that you can't have when you're younger and you have responsibilities. Not that I don't have responsibilities, but I have I have my own time and I have my own program now. You know, and so a lot of my songs are about that, and I'm really psyched about this record. You know, I have a song on it called Always, and it's a love song, but always means forever. It means eternity. It means no time. You know, and that's what I would call it. The Big Bang. The Big Bang. I mean, really, that's the cornerstone of. There's no Big Bang. You know, it's always. You know, it doesn't start. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's I turned that concept into a love song, and I think it's working great.
Wow, fantastic. I mean, one of the things I've found as I've got older is that you acquire wisdom because you can look back at all the experiences of your life. And one of the things I've always thought as I've got older is that when I chat with younger people, the one advantage I have is I've always been their age, whereas they've never been mine. So we are in a position whereby you gain wisdom, and sometimes it's very difficult to explain what you're trying to say. And I think music is one perfect tool because, as you rightly pointed out earlier on, it contains emotion. You know, music contains emotion within the chord changes, within the way the music works, the way in which certain musical elements causes sadness. A single cello playing, for some reason, is incredibly sad, but nobody could explain why it's sad. It just seems to be. And these are the kind of deeper things that I think you're trying to discuss. Now, very quickly, to finish off now, so how can people contact you? How can they find out about your music? How can they purchase your music? So please, you know, let them know, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people out there that'll be going, this guy's really doing some very, very deep stuff. And believe me, guys, he is. So let them know how they can contact you and everything else.
Well, I have a website, charliefarren.com, and my music is out on, and all of my CDs are available there. All of my studio CDs are available on all of the streaming, you know, iTunes, Amazon, all of them, right? So it's available anywhere you can get music. I should be there. But all of my CDs, I don't have things like my collections, things like my live CDs. I don't have in the streaming. Those you can get at charliefarren.com. And you can send me email on charliefarren.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. I'm on, now I'm on, how do you say it, Ovo?
I'm not sure. Dia could probably explain this. I just call it Uvu, but I have no idea how you pronounce it. Sorry, I was going to say, I've got no idea how you pronounce it at all. Dia will probably be the expert on that, so I just called it Uvo.
Obviously, LinkedIn, you know, I from my HP years, it's like almost to the point now with text, with voice to text. My phone turns my phone messages into texts. Facebook messaging, you know, LinkedIn. I start to lose. Like, I remember hearing from you, but I don't know. Was it email? Was it a LinkedIn message? Was it a Facebook message? So at some point, I'm going to have to start limiting these because it's just there's too many channels coming in to pay attention to. But I try to stay pretty active on all of these. You know, I'm maxed out on Facebook, but I have a site for my business, F-Man Media. So Facebook/F-Man Media is. I think there's no cap to those kinds of sites.
No, there isn't. No, there isn't. That's the major advantage of them, isn't it? Right. Well, thank you very much, Charlie. It's been wonderful talking to you. I've been looking forward to this for so long because it gives me the opportunity to talk about the things I love, which is my music and everything else. Right. Okay. Everybody, if you're interested, the next show, our guest will be Dr. Thomas Beck, who is a researcher into altered states of consciousness. And I'm really, really looking forward to talking to him next month as well. So, Charlie, thank you very much for spending an hour with us and giving us a glimpse of what it must be like to be a rock musician, which is just so cool. And I can actually enjoy it at a distance, as it were. So thank you very much. And thanks again to our lady in the background, Dia Nunez, who is down there in Denver, Colorado. And thanks again, and thanks for listening in, folks, and tune in again soon. Okay, thank you.